Dew pond. Dew pond. Dew pond. Dew pond. There, I've said it. I was reluctant to say it out loud because these words have a special meaning for me. In Croatian, this word translates as MLAKA, and for me this word has a deep resonance. In my village, Gornje Bukovlje, the word MLAKA is evocative. Here the villagers once took their cattle to drink at the MLAKA. Now this particular MLAKA is the last roadside dew pond to survive in Gornje Bukovlje. And even this one was almost eradicated when the men laying the asphalt road some 12 or so years ago disposed of their excess aggregate and earth by pushing it into the dew pond. Unfortunately, it would seem that they covered up one natural source of water that partially fed the pond. Its precise location is now lost, but on warm summer days when the fields around are parched, some of the soil by the edge of the pond and near to the road remains damp to the touch. I once heard an account of a man with dowsing rods who came one day to the village, and he traced a seam of underground water running just below the brow of the hill, heading in the direction of the dew pond. The trail continues in a straight line, passing somewhere near to the MLAKA, to where, a little further on, it reaches the house of our late neighbour, Mara. As she would often say to me, the cow provides half the food for the family. And where are the cows now? There are none left. They have all gone, and one no longer hears the sound of lowing cows in the evening from across the valley, and nor a corresponding reply coming from elsewhere. Over the years I would pass this MLAKA. I saw how it became overgrown. The brambles would obscure the view and prevent access, and then the water would disappear, seep into the ground, only to be replenished when the autumn rains came. And then the golden-coloured leaves would float upon the surface until they too would sink and decay. As I wandered around the village, I noticed how all of the MLAKAs that I was familiar with were gradually being filled in, covered in earth and lost. I especially wanted to keep some trace of the village's agricultural heritage intact. These were, for me, touchstones of village culture. When there is no cattle, they become neglected and havens for mosquitoes, but also dragonflies and birds. The village needs a variety of terrains to cater for all creatures. Without the cattle, without the manure, without the insects and the bees to pollinate the plants, the village becomes bland and bereft. So one spring morning in April 2021, I set about a project to clear the dew pond of its debris, its abundance of dead leaves, and all the brambles and hawthorn growing up around it. For 2 days I took my wheelbarrow of tools up to the pond, my cutters and shears, and whatever equipment I could find, and I hacked away at the undergrowth from around the pond. From the water I dragged out many bottles, bits of plastic, an old bucket and 2 fishing rods. When the rains came, the water once again collected and the MLAKA was refreshed. I would monitor this pond weekly and measure its level. And then I noticed that there was frog spawn. And then there were tadpoles. The tadpoles were swimming around happily, but it was a race against time. Would they complete their cycle before the water seeped into the ground? I would put my camera under the water and film them. There were many, but as the level of the water diminished, so too did their numbers. What to do? All I could think of at the time was to turf our lovely dog from out of the pool he uses to cool off in summer, and put that into the MLAKA. I filled it with water, and with a small child's fishing net gently scooped up what wriggling tadpoles I could find and transferred them to Zorro's bowl. This, I felt assured, would guarantee the survival of some of them at least. Since the village has lost so many authentic sounds, I hoped that I could reintroduce the music of croaking frogs to my end of the village. I then went back to town. A week later, and to my dismay, I found the water in the MLAKA had pretty much gone. And while Zorro's bowl still held up its end of the bargain, there was no life there to be found, just one dead tadpole. I was disappointed, and the failure struck me quite hard. The following year I resolved to buy a large sheet of nylon measuring 4 by 5 meters to install in the dew pond. I thought that this would be the solution. The water would stay and the tadpoles would complete their lengthy cycle. But what I hadn't taken into account was that after a few months the water, after sitting still, becomes stagnant. I managed to record 3 tadpoles. I pinned all my hopes on them until a little while later I filmed a snake lurking under a thin layer of scum that had formed on the water's surface. With a stick I gently nudged it to move along, but I could find no trace of my little guys. Therefore, with plan B not yielding the results I was hoping for, I simply decided, albeit reluctantly, to remove the nylon with 2 of my neighbours and let nature do what nature tends to do best. Over the years I've been taking my video camera up to the pond and narrating my progress. I would often go and sit by this pond with my paints and sketchbook and while away an hour or so. I would landscape the surroundings a bit by planting spring bulbs to enhance the scene I imagined I would be painting for many years hence. Now this dew pond has offered me tremendous potential for painting. I was developing an interest towards a more abstract outcome, but without losing completely the motifs of water, reflections, autumnal colours, earthy colours, leaf shapes. As the painting progressed, I would push in that direction, but now and then I would pull back a little and then reorientate myself to remind myself of the original idea. I lose myself in painting. I'm hardly conscious of the process itself as I'm doing it. But I got to a point when I stopped and I put the work at some distance to view it. At that moment, I had a profound realization that perhaps I couldn't take painting this dew pond, this MLAKA any further without simply repeating myself, and that I should stop at that point. It was a deeply illuminating but perplexing moment. However, as with all good ideas, new approaches reveal themselves, and I continue to explore the multi-dimensional aspects of below the water, on the water, above the water, reflected in the water, and growing through the water. There is still great pleasure to be had in just observing the changing seasons and aquatic life that manages to find refuge in this tiny pond.